GM, everyone. Welcome to our Twitter space. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin 2024, the election, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris. Just give us a few minutes while we get all of our guests lined up, and yeah, we'll kick off. Hey, Andy, how you doing?
Hey, man, I'm good. I just came out from another meeting, so glad I make it on time, man.
Yeah, for sure. We started a bit early, so we're still collecting all of our speakers and guests. But good to have you here. By the way, I'm Mugen. You can call me Mugen, or my actual name is Max.
Hey,
I think we
Max.
have, yeah, thanks. I think we will have Gareth also joining us from our editorial team. He was at Bitcoin 2024, so he's definitely going to be able to ask a lot of, more pointed and interesting questions than maybe I have. I did watch Donald Trump's speech, and, I thought, I have some thoughts about it, but, we'll get into a nice little discussion here. We'll definitely keep things civil. I know with politics, people can sometimes get heated. But, we're all here just to, really discuss, the topic in depth in a friendly and polite way. Oh, and here's Gareth. Let's get him as a speaker. Hey, Gareth. Doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, very good. Pretty excited for this space. I mean, obviously a lot to talk about. I see we are waiting for a few more people to jump on board. So, Max, I don't know if you want to give it another 30 seconds or so before we get going, and then I'll highlight some of the coverage that Cointelegraph had from the conference itself, and really looking forward actually to hearing from David Bailey, who's the CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, just to chat to him in general about the overall organization of the event. I'm very curious how the whole conversation with Donald Trump went, getting him on board as a speaker, because obviously that was the highlight of the event probably for most people. And I'm just very curious to hear how he got the ball rolling with that. I see he's not with us on the space just yet, so perhaps it is a good time just to quickly give an overview of the news, obviously. And then we can open it up to discussion to the rest of the guests that we have joining us this afternoon. And of course, if you are interested in making a comment, go ahead and make a request. We'll check you out and see if you are worthy to join us on the speaker stand. Yeah, we want to keep it pretty conversational and let everyone have a chance to speak and reflect on Bitcoin 2024 and what it could potentially mean for the US going forward with the elections very quickly coming up. So I think, first of all, the best thing to do would be to give an overview of Donald Trump's speech in particular. He made some pretty big promises for Bitcoiners in attendance. But if you ask me for my opinion, I would maybe say that RFK Jr. Was a bit more compelling. He definitely seemed like he probably knew a lot more about Bitcoin, and he sounded like he'd been hands-on with Bitcoin. He definitely understands, like someone who really understands the space well. So I thought that there were two contrasting speeches and probably the two highlights of that. I will throw this out, to get the conversation rolling, and then we can move on to some other coverage and news that happened. Maybe Maxwell, you can jump in first, and then we can open it up to some of our speakers.
Yeah, for sure. I do agree with you, on that RFK point, RFK Jr. And I think, one of the things that I wanted to discuss today is really Donald Trump's actual position on Bitcoin, whether this is, it seemed to me kind of that it was a campaign rally for him. He definitely diverted into a lot of his, standard talking points. So maybe we can start kind of with that and just get Andy and Michael and hey, Crypto Bay, I see you're here as well. our other co-host. But let's throw it to Andy and Michael. Maybe you guys can also just give a brief introduction of who you are, and then answer the question like, how important was Donald Trump's speech for the industry, and how much do you believe his promises that he made? Andy, you want to go first?
Yep, sure. Hi, I'm Andy from Singapore. I'm normally known as a book author. I give a lot of different advice to different governments. In fact, end of the week, I'm heading to Cambodia. I did not manage to get to Nashville this time, but I have my colleagues from AI company called Neurai. They are based in Singapore. Some of the members are there. They give me really nice feedback, and I felt that the atmosphere there is really good. RFK Jr., I had a chance to meet up with him back in New York, and I really believe, he is a very savvy, very crypto savvy guy, like what Garrett has mentioned, but for Trump, my views are a bit practical, to be honest, because whatever he says during that conference, everything just sounded really correct, and of course, like what Max mentioned, it seems like a campaign rally. I think it is, especially when he mentioned about firing Gary, as the chair of SEC, that really stirred up the crowd a lot. My friends in Asia are so happy to hear about that kind of news, and to some of us, we felt that this is a very bullish thing. And to be honest, in the past, some of my friends, including myself, we are not like a really big Trump supporter, but after his rally, it really seems to resonate with this crypto crowd a lot more than before. So I personally hope that he would just honor his words and get things going. And I love to see how that Bitcoin reserve is going to come out, and of course, firing Gary too, Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Andy. Let's throw it over to Mitchell. I see you're here as well. We have a few more guests joining us. We'll get to everyone. But Mitchell, if you want to just give a brief intro of yourself, and then just give your thoughts on Donald Trump and the speech, and maybe RFK as well.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm Mitchell Askew. I wrote The Conservative Case for Bitcoin, and I'm the head analyst at Blockware, a vertically integrated Bitcoin mining company. I was blessed to be able to go to Nashville. I thought it was a fantastic event. I've been to a few Bitcoin conferences now. I think this is by far the best one in terms of just the people that were there and sort of the vibes and the energy. And I definitely agree that RFK seems to have a better understanding of Bitcoin than Trump. And as I've talked to I've kind of talked to a lot of these political figures over the last week or so, and most of them don't really get it, right? You ask them to explain like the difficulty adjustment, or, how miners reduce flare gas emissions, or sort of the more esoteric Bitcoin ideas, like things that are in the weeds. They don't understand it. But to me, that's not a problem, right? That's not an issue. I know that the expectations were sort of high going into the Trump speech, especially after the RFK. But if you objectively, told any of us 6 months ago that Donald Trump would give that speech at the Bitcoin conference, we would have all been ecstatic, right? It's objectively good. He's talking about freeing Ross, firing Gary Gensler, maintaining a strategic Bitcoin stockpile, right? So the fact that he maybe doesn't understand it and couldn't, articulate maybe the differences between Bitcoin and crypto, or, how self-custody works, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, right? It tells me that Bitcoiners are influential enough. We have enough money. We're a large enough voter base that they have to appeal to us regardless on both sides of the aisle, right? And right now, Bitcoin's primarily been promoted by Republicans, but, you had a Democrat like Ro Khanna in Congress, and him and 9 other congressmen signed a letter to the other Democrats encouraging them to help push the needle on Bitcoin. So overall, I thought the speech was good. It has to be interesting for Trump, right? Because most of his speeches are to his base. And certainly there were Trump supporters in the audience, but there was also plenty of people who either don't like Trump or are very indifferent. And if you've ever watched or been to a Trump rally before, it's filled with applause and standing ovation. And he got some of that, but he didn't get all of it. And I don't think he could have gone up there for 50 minutes and talked about Bitcoin. But I think overall, he did a fine job. I thought the comment at the end about, play with your stuff, I thought that was a little weird and out of pocket, but generally speaking, I think it was great, and the energy in there was great, and I'm looking forward to seeing, how this sort of narrative develops over the last 6 months or 3 months headed to the election. Wow, it's right around the corner.
If I can jump in here, I think this is a good point to actually talk about this. Watching this from the sidelines and kind of directing, some of the coverage for Cointelegraph during the whole event. I mean, I think we wrote like at least 25 stories covering the event. We had stuff going out on X all the time. Kudos to the organizers for the live stream. It was really great. But what stuck out to me was definitely this overarching question of, is there some element of political capture here? Just considering that there were so many politicians using it as a platform to campaign. Let's be honest, it is what it was. But at the same time, it still means so much for Bitcoin and its acceptance by a mainstream audience to have so many public officials at one event. And I mean, we're not talking about like a token 2049. It's Bitcoin, 2024. That is a Bitcoin conference. That's what it's focused on. There's a clear difference when you go to these different events. But then you see someone like Jimmy Song, right at the start of their panel saying like, hey guys, why are we celebrating this? This is TradFi coming in here and pretending to be one of us when this is what we've been fighting for or like fighting against. And I thought that it was a very sort of important point to shine a light on in this space, just to get people's opinion. And, finally people are turning around on crypto. Isn't that what we wanted? But at the same time, some of the OG Bitcoiners are saying like, this is what we were fighting against. And I just found it very curious. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that subject.
I understand that sentiment, and I get it. I'm sure, for the OGs, it's got to be pretty odd to have this sort of these mainstream guys focused on Bitcoin. But if we want Bitcoin to be a 10, 50, $100 trillion asset, it doesn't happen without TradFi. It doesn't happen without political support, right? You can't consume that much of the world's wealth without those sort of fat cats coming in. All the same sort of comments when the ETFs were launched earlier this year. It's like, oh, we're against the bankers, and now like, why are we supporting the bankers? To me, it's not Bitcoiners giving in to the bankers and the politicians. It's the other way around entirely, right? They are capitulating to Bitcoin, and to me it's like a sign that we are winning and we are on the right path.
Maybe I can jump in here too. So I think it's interesting. Mitchell also brought up, kind of the, maybe the purpose of the speech, Donald Trump coming. It's on one hand, it's to kind of to get, the Bitcoiners' money, let's say, as campaign contributions, and then the other is, to get the votes. But what do you guys think? Is it really, what was the kind of the goal? Does the Bitcoin and crypto community really represent a voting bloc that is going to make any significant difference? Or is it mostly about, kind of garnering more campaign contributions?
If I may jump in here, I would like to say that I think Donald Trump does understand like many politicians do just talk about crypto to get votes, but this guy actually has launched like NFT collections and other things. And by the way he speaks, he knows like the difference between this blockchain-based assets on like other blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin, especially I think with this connection he has with like Robert Kiyosaki, that I know maybe people dislike him, but he does teach about like hard money and gold and real estate assets. And I think that's a good connection that can give like good references to Trump about this. So he just doesn't just talk about it. He actually has used the technology to make money, either through NFTs or getting donations or other stuff. While yes, other politicians just talk and promise. And I think in general, we saw when he was elected in 2016, like he did make things better for businesses, lowering taxes and other like walls. So I think that the probability for him to push this is pretty high, in my opinion. When he does win, if he does.
Yeah, I think if he does, definitely sticks out quite clearly. Mitchell, I wanted to ask you, as someone that was at the event, apparently it was crazy, obviously long lines everywhere. The Secret Service was involved. As much disruption was there, how well organized was the conference? What was it like for people on the ground?
Oh, it was great. I mean, for reference, I went to the 2021 Bitcoin conference in Miami. Way less people, way more disorganized. They've come a long way in 3 years, right? I don't know how many tickets they sold, tens of thousands, but I hardly ever had to wait in any line. Like, I wasn't getting, anal probe by TSA or anything, right? Like, it was efficient. I don't know if anybody was like watching the live stream or whatever, but it was delayed an hour late because some fella came in through the exit door to watch the Trump speech. Somehow they caught this, right? So they were locked up, they were tight, but overall, I mean, the event was fantastic. I think Nashville was the perfect place for it because everything was within walking distance, right? All the side events, you could hop from one event to the other like all day long. Something I didn't like about Miami is all of the events were scattered, right? You had to Uber 30 minutes to go from the conference to a side event to another side event. But with Nashville, was all right there together. Super, just the vibes were immaculate. Every sign post on the corner of the street had like a Bitcoin 2024 thing. I talked to a ton of people that were like, yeah, I'm not even really into Bitcoin, but I saw this was going on. I saw Trump's involved. I came to learn more. I talked to hundreds of people like that. And so I think these Bitcoin events, that's really where they shine, is getting the new people in. Because imagine if you're a normie, you're not in Bitcoin, you come in to one of these spaces, or just Bitcoin Twitter in general, right? It's a pretty, it's the Wild West. You've got, cartoon characters yelling at each other and like all this stuff. And it's great. Like, I love it. But to normal people, that's very off-putting. I think the chance to come and meet Bitcoiners in person, actually have conversation and really see that, hey, this is a real industry. Miners are real. We're consuming energy. Like, these are real people working on a real thing that's going to change the world. And so I think that's great for sort of getting normal people to understand Bitcoin. I'm not sure how I feel about it being in Las Vegas next year, but I think it'll also go well. But I also don't know how they'll ever top this, right? With it being one of the biggest election years of all time, going into a bull market, like first time having a president talk about it. It was great. Certainly one of the best weeks of my life.
Yeah, sorry, can I jump in with my favorite line? Can we please all retweet this Twitter space and engage with the post so that we have more listeners? Thank you.
We want to go viral like Bitcoin 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying our best.
Hey guys, I'd love to add a little bit of a take on the initial question, which is why this is so important. And I think when we look back at history, right, the way markets usually work is that you have either an institution or a fund that will create some sort of product. That product will be sent to the primary markets. You need to be an accredited investor, some sort of legitimized investor under an unusual framework, right? And then from primary markets, it goes to secondary market, and then retail can access. But I think what is really interesting in what we're seeing today, and obviously the fire Gary was the hottest topic of all, but I think there's something really, really relevant that not people are highlighting within Trump's speech. So it's very important to understand that when it comes to adoption curves, right? If we see this as institutional, Wall Street kicks it off. Once again, really, the retail comes in later. This is interesting because number one, retail got in before Wall Street, right? So already the trend has literally reversed. So retail got in first, Wall Street second. But having the government, especially the largest economic force in the world, literally talk about how Trump does not want to sell the actual assets. He doesn't want to sell the Bitcoin, because we need to remember, just a few weeks back, Germany dumped $3 billion of Bitcoin. And currently, US Treasury holds $15 billion of crypto in general. And the majority of those assets, 200,000 of those assets are Bitcoin. We have 217,000, I think, Bitcoin is held amongst, the US reserves. And the fact that Trump said that he didn't want to sell and he wanted to hodl the Bitcoin, for me, has huge significance, because this is the opposite direction of what China is doing, what the UK is doing, what other countries are doing. Now, on the flip side, what is not so good about all this is because all of these crypto assets, including Bitcoin, was essentially stolen from scammers. It's not the actual government buying Bitcoin, like we're seeing in El Salvador. But I think that has huge relevance, guys. You know, someone who's willing to hold $15 billion of assets, although whether he will actually do it or not, that's a different question. But if he can keep his promise and keep his word and holding $15 billion, and even better, you know, if Bitcoin goes from 60K to, let's say, 200K in the current cycle, and this $15 billion all of a sudden becomes $50 billion, that's getting very, very interesting. And unfortunately, it would have been even cooler if Trump, back in the days in 2016 and 2020, where he was anti-Bitcoin because he wanted to save the dollar, he was really interested in keeping the dollar, obviously, as a global reserve and as one of the major forces of the United States of America, right? But I think, you know, if we had actually seized that Bitcoin around his previous term, that Bitcoin would have done 100x. So I know it's a bit of a utopian world, but that $15 billion would be worth $150 billion today. But anyways, we can't backtrack. That's an ideal world. But I think it's very important, once again, to understand that the government is the most risk averse of anyone in the adoption curve. If you look at what the Federal Reserve holds in terms of assets, the majority is bonds, mortgages, some AAA corporate bonds, money markets, gold. Who would have thought that the US wants to huddle Bitcoin in their assets and their reserves? That to me was massive news, and it shows us, you know, so much progress. I mean, it's not just Wall Street progress, it's governmental progress. So, sorry, I just wanted to stress that a little bit. I thought that it was kind of not appreciated as much as we should if he keeps his promise.
Yeah, no, great point. I agree. And I think it'll be easy promise to keep too, because it's a promise of inaction, right? It's saying, hey, I'm not going to sell these coins we have. And kind of, it was overshadowed by, you know, RFK's sort of more elaborate proposal of getting 4 million Bitcoin, which wouldn't even be possible. I don't even think there's that many on the exchanges. You would bid the price to the moon. Couldn't happen. And I think it was more outlandish rhetoric, just knowing he's not really a real candidate. No offense to him. Like, I enjoy listening to him speak or whatever. But kind of what got overshadowed by all of this was Cynthia Lummis, right? I don't know why they organized it the way they did, but like after Trump spoke, everyone left out of the main hall. And then Cynthia Lummis goes up there with the bill in hand to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve, right? And begin accumulating. And I was listening to her on a podcast this morning, and right now they have, 200,000 Bitcoin. And she wants to get to 1 million Bitcoin, right? Because then you have roughly 5% of the total supply, which is what the U.S. has of gold, right? They have about 5% of the gold supply. And you brought up a good point about the government being risk averse. And that's objectively a fact, right? They're sort of assets that are reserve assets or treasury bonds in gold. But really, like any of us who have put in the work, we know that Bitcoin actually is risk off. It's traded like a risk on asset. It has correlation to equities and it's super volatile. But fundamentally, it is risk off because it's neutral money. It's a limited supply. It's a commodity, right? It's like oil. It's like land. It's like gold. It's like wheat, except with other commodities, when the price goes up, you can produce more of it. But with Bitcoin, when the price goes up, more miners plug in, you don't produce any more of it. So it is the ultimate risk-off asset. And historically, it hasn't really been understood by many people that that's what it is. But the government adding it as a reserve asset kind of tells the world, hey, this is serious. Like the United States government wants to hold Bitcoin because they feel that that's one of the only things they can do to prolong the longevity of the dollar, right? The dollar, we're de-dollarizing, right? Japan, largest holder of treasuries, they're dumping treasuries. China's dumping treasuries. You have all these boomers that their retirement's going to be dependent on the treasuries in their portfolio. The only way for the United States government to get out of this somewhat solvent is with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on the back of that. Like you mentioned RFK in his speech saying, you know, we want to accumulate $4 million of Bitcoin. And I had watched Michael Saylor's speech earlier in the day, and it literally just looks like RFK had been speaking to Michael Saylor quite a lot and had kind of borrowed that same sort of mentality. And he's gone for that, what is it, you know, like, are you a triple maxi, you know, he's gone for that triple maxi mentality. And I mean, if the US had 4 million Bitcoin, yeah, it would cost them billions of dollars to buy that. And, you know, it's a bit of a pipe dream, but it's still at the same time, I think he understands the value proposition. And that's why he said he would do such a bullish thing. But what I'm also curious to find out more about, and we've already got some of our journalists looking into this at Cointelegraph, is the fact that some of the Bitcoin which the US government has access to was Bitcoin seized from Silk Road and other law enforcement events. So some might argue that Bitfinex still have some stake in, I think, the almost 90,000 Bitcoin, or it's more than that. I think it's 100,000 Bitcoin that the US government own that Bitfinex could get back as it was, hacked and stolen by Razzle Khan. And the question is, okay, does that mean that half of the Bitcoin that the US government owns is not rightfully theirs to claim if they were to adopt this strategic asset reserve? I don't know if anyone wants to take this question, but to me, it kind of looks like open-ended whether they can actually just lay claim to this whole stack of Bitcoin that they have.
They don't care, right? They everyone knows about Executive Order 60. They seize gold, whether it's morally right or not, doesn't really stop them from doing it. I think this is probably now as good a time as ever to say not your keys, not your coins, right? I certainly would not want to be holding any Bitcoin on Coinbase going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary reality, right? It really does actually throw the ball in the court of the crypto holder, and just understanding that, like, unless you're self-custodying your assets and doing it right, there's some element of risk that is always going to exist there. In terms of the amount of politicians that were on the ground speaking, I think it's great to see such a positive rhetoric towards Bitcoin. What remains to be seen is whether that this talk is going to carry out into action. And after the elections at the end of the year, is the US really going to have a much more friendly administration towards crypto? And if anyone of our speakers can speak to the US market in general, if this is really going to turn things around, because for the past 3 or 4 years, with the way the SEC has been going, it's been a really hostile place for anyone involved in crypto, and you had to be very resilient to survive.
Maybe I can jump in on that, Garrett. I think this. Speaking from an Asia perspective, I think what was done at the conference is really very bullish. Superly well received on our end. But what I would love to also mention, I think, hi Alex. He mentioned something about Trump talking about China, citing about China's competition and so forth. On my end, I would love to see US getting involved in all these cryptocurrency markets. Of course, we would, all these OG guys can try to steer them to the right direction, because having them involved is going to make the whole market, really pumped, really, really hyped up, right? I think that is really cool, 100% supportive, but I also would love to see how maybe China can reconsider their stance on Bitcoin as well, looking at how Trump is trying to drive things and so forth. Because if you just look at it from a larger global perspective, if China were to lift its ban on Bitcoin, it could really lead to a very significant boost in terms of a global trading volume, potentially driving up, all the cryptocurrency prices, so that re-entry, could also definitely bring a lot of liquidity and interest for the market, and then China on the other hand is also if they are going to come on board, I think they can share a lot more innovation, and that kind of global influence and competition that is going to happen, to be honest, is going to drive the whole crypto market to the next level. And this is something that I really hope to see. Of course, I'm trying to spin off from what this UN stand is like right now. And I think that is really something that I personally look forward to as well.
I would love to comment on that, because I think Andy is really hitting the most important point for the future. Because the whole talk in question about whether Trump will follow up on all his promises, the reason why a lot of you out there probably doubt this is because we're always being given these promises, regardless of the US president, that are always half broken. They will never be able to fully deploy all the promises or execution that they initially offered, simply because they're funded by people, establishments that also have an agenda, and it becomes very political, right? So the question is not, will Trump be anti-crypto or pro-crypto? He's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. So that's not really a conversation that I think is particularly interesting. However, what Andy just said on creating some sort of free markets, capital markets, where the US goes into competition against China, now that is super interesting. And the reason why I think this is interesting is, well, first of all, to take a step back, why did Donald Trump all of a sudden get interested in crypto when he was pro-dollar and he was like, oh, you know, Bitcoin is not a thing, it's just a volatile asset, it's made out of nothing, et cetera, et cetera. He started changing his mind when Melania started releasing a collection of NFTs. And Melania, she made 6 digits. I couldn't find the exact numbers because these things are very hard to find, but I think it was somewhere around the $200,000 mark. Then Trump started releasing his own NFTs, which I believe that his 4th collection will come out soon. He made also between $3 to $4 million. And whether he's going to be more pro or anti-crypto is really, I believe that action speaks way louder than words. So if he's actually using the network, obviously he's not minting his own NFTs or designing anything, but he's still indirectly using the network. And I think the actions here are showing that he is favorable. Plus he's made money. Plus he's had, you know, $4 million in donations, including from the smartest people in the industry, including the Winklevoss brothers. So, and $5 million is not little, guys. Like Donald Trump, for this campaign, he's raised roughly 200 million. So it's still a decent percentage, right? Obviously, it's not what the big institutions like Bank of America will donate, but it's still a decent amount of money. So actions speak louder than words. But going back to what Andy said, you know, on China, if Trump says that he wants the Bitcoin to be mined in the US, if he wants to give, you know, looser regulations for the exchanges, for custody and all these things, will that stir up a fire for China to unban crypto as well? Which, by the way, China, there's still lots of mining in China. The exchange side is a little bit gray. But I think what Andy said there is the most important part, because if all of a sudden the US is starting to make a lot of money, which, by the way, El Salvador are up 60% on their investment. So they've clearly grown their treasury, their local reserve assets in terms of US dollar. And so I think that is something that we need to follow very, very carefully. I think there are 2 factors: US competing with China, potentially leading to an unban in China, but also Hong Kong, which is kind of their pilot place for applying cryptocurrencies. If that succeeds as well, then all of a sudden we can see much more governmental adoption.
I think what Alex was focusing on is really good, because maybe direct policies around like holding Bitcoin by the government, et cetera, can be harder. But we all know that Donald Trump is like pro-energy, like local energy, and probably will push the energy sector in the US really hard and energy production up, trying to bring the prices down. And that's another like way to look at it, because of course the mining industry will be affected by this, like either the US being more friendly around that industry, or lowering the cost of production in the US of Bitcoin. That could definitely influence the price, and in many ways as well. So I think, I don't know what's your opinion, guys, but I think that's another way of seeing it, because directly policies in Bitcoin crypto can be way harder to implement by him alone. He has to get more government branches involved, but energy sector just benefits more industries, not just exclusively crypto.
Great point. And I thought that was one of the best parts of Trump's speech, when he's talking about, we're going to double electricity production. You're going to say, no, we have too much electricity. Let's stop. I think that's amazing, because energy is what gives human life sustenance. And I sort of agree with the idea you guys have been floating around, that like direct policy is not as influential. But the way I think about it is neutral policy for Bitcoin is good, because there's always, as long as I've been in Bitcoin, the FUD is, oh, the government's going to shut it down. So them at the bare minimum taking sort of a neutral, agnostic approach to Bitcoin, I think that's a total win.
Can I maybe make a contrarian point here? You know, and this isn't like a fully fleshed out opinion, but you know, in some ways I feel like, you know, the success of the industry over the past, you know, 10, 15 years, it's always been in, you know, in an environment that we have to fight. And that resiliency that Gareth mentioned earlier, yes, it's difficult in this like environment. We have an aggressive, you know, we have aggressive regulators in the US, but in my mind, actually, there could be a case that that is more that's healthy, and that we actually thrive in that response. Like, you know, you mentioned there's fear and FUD that the government's going to like shut it down. Well, I would just say go ahead and try. You know, that's the point of Bitcoin, is that, you know, a government can't just come and shut it down. So, you know, when we've been talking a lot about Trump and like what he might do, and I think I have some fears that maybe an overly pro administration in terms of crypto could actually be dangerous. And maybe, you know, it's hard to see what Kamala Harris's position is, but, you know, we've had a very sustained bull run here now for, you know, quite a few months now. There hasn't been like a peak and a valley like we've seen in previous cycles. So maybe, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know if anyone wants to respond to that.
Say your fear of it being overly pro would potentially like maybe lead to enabling another FTX sort of situation, and then the swing back in the other way is so violent. Is that sort of the threat you're pulling?
Yeah, I mean, and like we can look back throughout all of like crypto's history, you know, it's like, you know, Mt. Gox or FTX or like even the ICO boom. Like, I mean, there's times where, yes, there's been a lot of attention and people are super excited, there's hype, but then, you know, there's a heavy crash afterwards. And I don't think that's sustainable, especially now that there are, you know, crypto is being woven more and more into the fabric of like the traditional economy. You know, I think that it could be, there could be a potential for a disaster if, you know, all of a sudden there's less oversight, you know, we kind of like relax regulations that actually maybe we need. But, you know, obviously people with skin in the game, I want my wallets to pump too. But I am here in the I'm here for the long term. You know, I'm thinking decades from now. I'm not, you know, I don't want to like Trump become president for a second term and sell all my Bitcoin in, you know, 2027 when he's about to leave. So maybe you guys have a, you know, a counterpoint to that. But, you know, we've been talking a lot about, you know, if Trump will win, but at this point, you know, and with American elections, it's honestly like a flip of the coin. So what do we see in the other scenario where the Democrats, you know, Kamala Harris takes control of the executive branch? You know, maybe they continue, you know, to hold the Senate, make gains in the House. What is the kind of alternative environment, and how could crypto, you know, kind of respond to that?
I think in US, to be very honest, I think there's always you know, different views from different parties and so forth. I don't think they can, you know, get a straightforward yes, and then, you know, everything would just be super crypto friendly. To be very honest, I think the resistance is going to be there, you know, all the time, you know. So that's my perspective. And to be very candid about this is that, you know, for myself, you know, I speak to different government, not US, not too much, but different countries. I think some of them are more open to cryptocurrency, and they have their own committee, they have their own like sandbox model where they could do a bit of trial and error and so forth. I think US, maybe it's too late to say this, but, you know, there must be a certain way or a certain committee that can really, you know, drive things forward, plus balancing what is required, you know, because at the end it's all about consumer production. Is, you know, they also want to avoid another case of FTX. You know, they just want things to be a lot more safer. You know, in fact, to be again very straightforward, is that, you know, last 2 weeks ago I was in US. You know, I was I was in Japan. I was talking to some new exchanges that is going to come out very soon. You know, they are also very well funded by US folks. You know, and in fact, a lot of you know, US capital are also trying very hard to invest into all these different Bitcoin entity or this crypto entity overseas. You know, I think, you know, everyone is trying to build in different manner, and I strongly felt that, you know, US will not be 100% pro, and there will be, you know, people doing different things, you know, to try to balance things out.
No, that's a good point.
You do sort of bring up a nightmare scenario I've thought of is, Trump wins, we get a massive 4-year bull market, and then you get a far left radical anti-Bitcoiner in there for the next term, and just an absolutely brutal crash, right? I think we all here would like to avoid that. And through the conversations I've had with people, it's the anti-Bitcoin rhetoric. Let's focus on the Democratic Party, right? Because, like, not to get partisan or whatever, but they are positioning themselves as anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto. But it's really not the majority of them. It's the far left radicals like Elizabeth Warren, right? And she runs that joint, like, she's one of their top figureheads. If you go against her, you're going to lose support, you're going to lose donors, you're going to lose whatever. But as they sort of box out figures like that and the more moderate sort of, Silicon Valley entrepreneurial types in the Democrat Party, which are pro-Bitcoin, as they box her out and take over that party, I think we'll get, that sort of fear will subside. I think ultimately in the long run, Bitcoin is embraced by both parties. But I do think right now you're seeing a knee-jerk reaction from sort of the anti-Trump, Trump derangement syndrome people, where Trump becomes pro-Bitcoin. So their immediate reaction is, oh, it must be bad. But I think, with number go up and with more education, that sort of reflex will go away.
Yeah, I think, we're probably getting to the end of this conversation now, but a key takeaway for me is just, what happens? Are we going to see, a lot more crypto conversations happen in the next 2 months as we lead up to the actual election itself? I know there was already talk of Kamala Harris making some appearances at some other crypto and blockchain related events, and maybe she will end up sort of finally giving the public some sort of idea of her take on Bitcoin and what the policy would be towards Bitcoin and crypto in general. Do you see crypto being one of the main kind of talking points continuing on from here, just given that, people like Coinbase estimate that there's more than 50 million crypto users in the US? So it's clearly a very big group of people to pander to.
I would love to tag along with regards to Donald Trump and the impact on the bull market. Is that okay if I comment?
Go ahead, please.
Earlier?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of people are very confused in this market, right? There are many broken pieces. Is Bitcoin correlated to stocks, right? Negatively, positively. We had S&P 500, and then in fact that was still going through some sort of bull run. But then a lot of people are saying it was the AI bubble. It's a large cap AI bubble and hardware, GPU manufacturers that are literally pushing up the market artificially. But I think, for all those listening out there, it's not really the correlation between markets. It's really, number one, the amount of liquidity that's available. That's the most important part. And then, of course, the risk appetite, right? And the way I see it, obviously Donald Trump, he is very proud of his economic figures. He's very proud of financial markets and the way they were behaving before COVID hit, right? It's one of his favorite vanity metrics, right? And so what I see him trying to do as soon as he gets into the office is, obviously he cannot fire Gary Gensler directly. He has influence. It's in his spheres of influence. He has to find a good reason to be able to fire him, such as, some sort of inefficiency or a very strong reason to back some sort of layoff. But I think what he will want to do is, number one, bring down the interest rates so that liquidity moves from money markets, gold, cash, and starts being injected again. And then after he lowers down the interest rates, then money printing goes back again. And that's an extra kick in liquidity. But I think one thing that many people, when they do these type of macro analysis, something that they really forget is the lack of liquidity in our market. For everyone listening out there, I'm sure that you're probably not as liquid as you'd want to be. And the reason being is because even the current market, with the downfall of FTX, with the downfall of Celsius, Mt. Gox still has billions to distribute, right? $9 billion. It's really important also to take into consideration what will bring new retail, but what will also bring us back the wealth and the people who have already adopted crypto that is locked up because of some poor practices and some evil players in the game. So I think once again, guys, we always want to find something that's positively or negatively correlated to give us some sort of hint and hope on what happens in the future. But I think the problem is much more basic. Number one, where is the liquidity and how can that inflow? And then what is the risk appetite? And I think all of those factors combined, we can have the current crypto market, current people actually using, trading, the networks, on the networks, plus the new retail, plus the new institutions. And if that happens, right, if we manage to get all of this liquidity, I think we could have a massive, massive bull run. Obviously, there are many ifs, but let's see.
Alex, I think that was really well said. And I always think of Bitcoin as an index for global liquidity, right? That's sort of the reason we had the massive bear market in 2022, because the liquidity began contracting. I will say, however, like I hear a lot of talk about, when retail gets here, but right now retail's broke, right? If you think about 2021, the bull market, the Robinhood, GameStop meme stock craze, it's because they just got that $1,200 stimulus check, right? In retail right now, they're neck deep in credit card debt. They're working 2 jobs. They're basically broke, paycheck to paycheck. They have no money to be buying assets, right? And so we're going to need another QE bazooka before retail gets here.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, probably a really good point to end the full space on. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. I did want to say, if you missed some of the news from Bitcoin 2024, we did cover it pretty much 24/7 during the event. We had plenty of people on the ground shooting exclusive content. We've got an exclusive interview with RFK Jr. on our YouTube channel, if you'd like to check that out. If you missed Trump's speech, we've got the full speech uploaded there on our YouTube channel. If you want to see the 7 takeaways, that's there as well. If you want to read some content, like I mentioned, we've got about 25 different articles that we wrote during the conference. So yeah, go ahead and check out any of the news that you missed from the weekend. And we look forward to having you join us on the next Cointelegraph X Space. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.